Gather round, my young friends. Today, I'm passing down a story from our ancient past that, well, it completely shifts how we see the world. As we uncover the true history of Babel, I want you to really open your minds. This isn't just some dusty tale about ancient bricks and mortar. It's a profound story about human nature, divine judgment, and the hidden cosmic forces that literally shaped the nations we live in today. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so think about this. Did Babel really happen exactly the way you've always been told? You might have heard this simple Sunday school version about people building a really tall tower out of pure pride, and then suddenly, boom, everyone's speaking new languages. Just 9 quick verses, a little lesson on arrogance, and everyone moves on. But the true historical and cosmic reality, it's so much deeper and honestly way more fascinating than that simplified children's version.
To grasp the real weight of this story, we have to look back at the very beginning of the biblical record. Before we even get to the story of Abraham, humanity fell and faced 3 massive, world-altering judgments. First, there was Eden, where paradise was completely closed off. Second, the flood, where the whole world was undone by water, leaving just one family standing. And the third is Babel, which brought the intense confusion and scattering of humanity. And of all 3, Babel is the one we probably misunderstand the most. To truly understand what went down there, we've got to remember a really crucial rule for reading ancient scripture. This ancient book isn't trying to give us a global history of the whole planet. It never mentions China, the Americas, or Scotland. Instead, it's a tightly focused, zoomed-in covenant story about one specific Hebrew family and their unique relationship with God. It isn't a global story of everyone on Earth until Jesus arrives much later to make it one. So, keeping that zoomed-in focus in mind, the text rewinds the clock in Genesis 11. It shows us a moment where one specific community in the land of Shinar, which, by the way, is a real historical place in southern Mesopotamia, was completely unified. They were of one language and one speech. They lived so close together that a single word meant the exact same thing to absolutely everyone who heard it. But wait, if we look just one chapter earlier, we discover something amazing hiding right in plain sight. A mighty warrior named Nimrod wasn't just some bystander to this event. According to Genesis 10, he was actually already building cities, including Babel, right in this exact region. He was the founder. The city was already underway before we ever even get to the famous tower in chapter 11. And what were they actually trying to do in this city? Well, just like the famous men of renown before the flood who desperately wanted earthly glory, these builders were trying to make a permanent name for themselves on their own terms. They were completely leaving God out of the picture. They were basically repeating the exact same shape of rebellion that caused the flood in the first place, acting as if they had entirely forgotten the lessons of the past. Now, this specific detail really builds our understanding of who was actually there. It's absolutely crucial to realize that we are not watching all of humanity converge on one giant construction site. Not at all. We're only watching the families of Noah's sons Shem and Ham. What about his third son, Japheth? Well, his descendants had already taken their families and migrated far away to the north and west. And this perfectly illustrates how ancient storytelling works. The author uses this single memorable 9-verse event at Babel as a powerful flashback. It's like a close-up embedded inside a much wider picture, used to explain the mechanism behind the massive scattering of nations that was already happening all around the ancient world. It's a focused case study capturing a much larger reality. This short scene brilliantly compresses 4 massive historical shifts into a single narrative moment. You can think of these as the 4 ripples of Babel. We see languages splitting apart, people migrating outward away from each other, entirely new nations forming, and underneath all of that, a slow, tragic drift away from worshiping the one true God towards something else entirely. Now, what is truly mind-blowing is how real history perfectly aligns with this text. While Shem and Ham's lines were down in Mesopotamia building Babel, history shows us that Japheth's descendants, a real scientifically documented group known as the Yamnaya, were living far to the north on the Eurasian steppe. Get this, they are the ancestral population behind nearly every Indo-European language spoken today. During this exact window of ancient history, roughly between 3300 and 2600 BC, the Yamnaya exploded outward across Europe and Asia. They definitely didn't just stay put. They moved in massive waves. And this incredibly widespread dispersal perfectly mirrors the era of splitting languages and forming new nations that the biblical text describes happening as a ripple effect around the exact same time.
Amazingly, linguists who trace these migrating Yamnaya languages found something incredible. They originally worshipped a single moral creator known as the Sky Father, named Dyaus, but as they scattered further and further from their homeland, this original belief slowly drifted. It fragmented into the crowded, chaotic, polytheistic pantheons we know today, like Zeus in Greece, Jupiter in Rome, and Indra in India. So, the really crucial point here is that this drift away from the one true God didn't actually start at Babel. It had been happening slowly for generations. But Babel was the tipping point. It was the moment that the spiritual drift finally hardened into formal, structural, nation-based worship of many gods. Gods and nations became permanently locked together. Centuries later, the great lawgiver Moses looks back at Babel in the text of Deuteronomy, and he reveals a hidden cosmic reality that honestly blows the Sunday school version out of the water. He writes that God deliberately divided the nations and set their boundaries as a direct form of judgment for their persistent rebellion. We are told plainly in Deuteronomy 4 that God literally handed these rebellious, scattered nations over to lesser spiritual authorities, often known as the host of heaven. God permitted these lesser spiritual beings to preside over and govern the people who had actively chosen to walk away from him to build their own name and their own legacy. As the late, great scholar Michael Heiser pointed out, this creates a deeply profound framework. Babel isn't just a story about confused bricklayers dropping their tools and walking off a job site. It is the eerie, precise moment in history when God formally handed the rebellious world over to other spiritual powers. It was, in a sense, a divine divorce from the nations. But, my young friends, the story doesn't end in complete darkness. While God handed the rest of the scattering world over to these subordinate spiritual powers, he kept one specific family line entirely for himself. The text says that Jacob, meaning Israel, is kept directly by God as his own unique portion and inheritance. And this is exactly why the very next chapter in Genesis shows God calling Abraham seemingly out of nowhere. God reaches directly into the scattered, polytheistic wreckage that Babel left behind to start a brand new covenant family. He was starting something beautifully new amidst a deeply fallen and fractured world, creating a people who would belong only to him. So, knowing that this grand, historical, and deeply cosmic narrative is the true reality we are living in, a world of scattered nations and divine inheritances, I want to leave you with this question. How will you choose to step into this ongoing, magnificent story today?